If you look at Kawasaki lately, they're one of the few manufacturers that seem to be playing a bit more freely, not randomly, but free from the usual straight-line market logic. While a lot of bikes today are starting to look more and more alike, Kawasaki keeps spending time on things that to most people seem unnecessary. Small four-cylinder engines, old names, classic designs, and this isn't a one-time thing. You can see the pattern. And when something keeps repeating, there's usually a reason for it. That's why when talking about where Kawasaki's lightweight lineup could be heading, this doesn't really feel like a conversation about what will be released next. It feels more like a question of personality. What kind of character are they actually trying to define? Because if you take a small step back, Kawasaki has been playing in this space for a long time. Take the RS family for example. The Z400RS didn't succeed because it was the most retro bike out there. Plenty of manufacturers are doing classic-inspired designs. What made the RS different is that it doesn't make a big deal out of the past. It's classic, sure, but it's quiet about it. That doesn't constantly remind you how vintage it is. The Z650RS followed the same idea, and the result was pretty consistent. So when the idea of a Z400RS started floating around, it didn't feel like a wild concept. Mentally, Kawasaki already feels ready for it, and if you imagine the Z400RS, it's probably the safest RS of them all. And yeah, that might sound boring to some people. Clean design, compact proportions, a rounded tank, a familiar round headlight. One look and you immediately know this is an RS. No big visual surprises. And maybe that's exactly why it feels like the most logical option, but also the most predictable. The one that actually made me stop for a moment was the Zephyr 400RS. Because the Zephyr name carries a slightly different kind of history. Back then, the Zephyr was known as a relaxed, substantial, naked bike, not aggressive, not sharp, and visually a modern version would almost certainly carry that same vibe. A fuller fuel tank, classic blue and black striping, a long seat that looks genuinely comfortable. From the outside, it looks calm, almost polite. Things get interesting when you think about what's hiding underneath. A ZX4R engine behind a look like that feels very contrasting. This is a bike that doesn't look like it's asking to be ridden hard, but it absolutely can be. And that modern digital dash tucked into a classic layout feels slightly out of place, though maybe that's intentional. Because this might look like an old school bike, but it's still Kawasaki today. If the RS is Kawasaki's clean and mature side, the FX is the complete opposite. The original Z400FX was born in a time that wasn't exactly normal either. When many manufacturers were moving away from four-cylinder engines because of crises and efficiency concerns, Kawasaki went the other way. The FX became a symbol of that stubborn attitude. So when you see the idea of a modern Z400FX, it doesn't feel like simple retro styling. It feels like a statement. Visually, the FX is stiff, straight tank lines, flat seat, sharp bodywork, not many curves, a plain round headlight. This is a bike that looks tough even when it's just standing still. And its appeal isn't really about beauty, it's about attitude. A bike that doesn't try to be liked by everyone. What's interesting is that the FX doesn't even need to sell itself through the engine alone. A four-cylinder motor hidden behind a design this rigid works as a surprise. From a distance, it looks simple. Up close, you start noticing upside-down forks, big radial brakes, wide tires, modern hardware hidden in plain sight, and that kind of contrast feels very Kawasaki. If the Z400FX still sounds somewhat reasonable, the Z250FX moves straight into emotional territory. Because historically, small displacement four-cylinder bikes have always been about feeling, not necessity, and Kawasaki has a clear track record here. The ZX25R is the clearest example, a bike that knew from day one it was too niche, and yet it was built anyway. So if a ZX25X ever exists, it wouldn't be a bike you explain with numbers. Visually, it might even look pretty ordinary. Small, classic, sharp, but the moment you know what engine it has, your perception changes completely. This isn't a bike meant to convince everyone. It only needs a small group of people who truly get it. And that's enough. Bikes like this rarely sell in huge numbers, but they tend to live much longer in people's memories. On the other side, there's the Z250RS, which might be the most human of them all. Not the wildest, not the loudest. Visually, it's friendly, rounded tank, classic graphics, light proportions, a bike that wouldn't feel complicated as a daily ride. But under that calm surface, there's an engine with far more character than you'd expect at first glance. And maybe that's exactly where its strength is. A small RS doesn't need to explain itself. It's calm, but it has a secret. The Z900RS worked because it was enough in so many areas. People didn't need to search for its strengths, and if that same approach is brought down into the 250cc class, it could resonate with more riders than we might expect. Just to be clear, this isn't about predicting which of these bikes will actually be released. Kawasaki almost certainly won't build all of them, and that's completely normal. But across all these ideas, one thing feels consistent. Kawasaki seems to be redefining what a small bike means in their world. Not just affordable, not just efficient, but something with real character. And if even one of these bikes becomes reality, that alone would make the lightweight segment more interesting, not because of specs, but because of the approach. Because in a market where bikes are starting to feel more and more similar, it's refreshing to see a manufacturer still willing to build machines with a distinct personality. So now I'm curious, if you were in Kawasaki's position and you could only choose one direction to move forward with, which would you pick? The clean and refined RS, the hard-edged FX, or the smaller, more emotional option? Drop your take in the comments, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more. See you in the next one.